Hello, everybody. How's it going? Let's go ahead and get started today. I'm trying to think if we have any announcements. The first assignment's due today, tech jobs. So hopefully you've been making progress on that. I know I've seen a lot of questions about that on Slack and such. If you need help, definitely make sure you stick around and ask today. After our little review session here, we'll be happy to help you out. I'm not sure if the next assignment's been posted yet or not, but it'll be coming pretty soon if it hasn't been posted already. We're going to keep today. We're going to keep traveling down the path that we were doing on Monday, where we introduce you to the Spring framework, writing MVC applications in Java. So we did that in Python. We're going to keep rolling down the Java stuff, doing the same kinds of ideas. A lot of concepts are going to be reviewed. It's sort of the same story. If you understand the concepts, a lot of that's similar, but the way that it looks in Java is pretty different. The syntax is pretty different. The structures that you need to put in there are pretty different. So that's kind of what we want to get you used to with these exercises today. So let's go ahead and dive in. The prep work today was 3 sections, all based on views, the view part of MVC. So let's just recap. What's the role of a view in the MVC paradigm? What's the role of the view? I'm sorry? Let you see. That's the display, right? That's what the user actually views, what they see when they visit your application. So what's it interacting with? The controller, right? So based on what the user types in, or what buttons they click, or what things they do on the view side, the controller is going to update that information, right? Update the way that it's presented to the user. So we use templates to represent the view. That was true of Python as well. Right, we had the render template stuff that we did with Python. It's the same idea. We're using Java now, though, and we're not using Flask anymore to do that stuff for us. We're using a framework called Thymeleaf to do that for us instead. And so, how does a controller refer to a view? We have controllers. We saw controllers on Monday. Actually, Monday was all based around writing controllers in Java. How does the controller actually tell a view or talk to a template or tell it to do something? What does that look like in our code? Annotations? Well, let's take a look. I think I've got the code up. Let's take a look at the controller that you did for prep work today. Oops, went the wrong way. Which part of, so here's a little handler, right? Which part of this is referring to the view? I heard request mapping, I heard the model. What files represent the view in the templates? So over here, if I look at the templates folder, I see fragments. We're going to talk about those a little bit later. And one called index and one called add. And so if I look for references to templates in my controller, I see it here. The return statement, right? Return cheese/index. So it's saying, go find the template that's in this cheese folder called index. That's the template that I want you to render for this particular route. The route in this case being the cheese route. Does that make sense? Is that clear? In Python, we would have said render template, I believe was the name of the function that we use in Python to make this happen. It's a little bit less explicit here. We just say, here's the name of the template that I want you to use, right? Here's the name of the template that I want you to use to do stuff. How do we pass stuff into our templates? What part of the code is doing that? That's the model. So here you see that we add stuff to our model add attribute, and then we add this cheeses, which I believe is a list. It's an array list. We see it up here, actually. And then a title, which you see down here as well. My cheeses. So those, so what does this represent, this attribute name here? Where am I going to see this again? Where do I expect this to show up? In the view. In the view. So if I go over to index.html, I'm going to see references to cheeses right here. I'm going to see references to cheeses. And actually, again, down here, here's that same list. Oops, Here's that same list. And the title was actually up here. So we can see the syntax for how to reference that in our views, in our Thymeleaf views. There's our good friend, the curly brace again. That's actually kind of similar to how Flask did it, right? It doesn't look exactly the same because we bring in this $sign character as well. So whenever you see this $sign curly brace notation, that means you're referring to some variable that's been passed in via this model. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about how that process works or what those pieces are? So if you want to add something else to this page, right, what do? You go back here and add a new attribute to your model, and then you can refer to that attribute in the view that's being rendered. In fact, we're going to play around with that a little bit later when we do an exercise today. All right. So just like we saw with Flask, we can do certain things within our views, like loops. How do I do a loop in Thymeleaf? Each. I think there was probably actually an example that I was looking at just a second ago in our index. So here we see this word each. Notice too that every instruction, every command that we're using to talk to Thymeleaf is prefixed with this th colon notation. So this is telling us that, oh hey, we want to interact with our controller in some way, or we want to do something a little bit more programmatic here. We want to write a loop, or what's this doing? Th unless? That's like an if statement. Yeah, it's like an if statement. We saw those in Flask too. Same idea, just looks a little bit different. Yeah.
While you're on that line, could you explain again what line 9 there is doing exactly? What the
Okay.
Jesus side is saying?
So what's line 9 doing for us? Actually, I'd be happy to explain it to you, but let me open up the floor and see if somebody else wouldn't mind helping me out. Could somebody explain what's going on with this line here? I think it's a great question. Yeah.
Saying if there's anything in the list of cheeses and if the list is not 0, then, or I'm sorry, if the list is 0.
So I agree with you to I guess structure that in a little bit. What you said is correct. It's making sure that the list exists. That's what this first part is specifying. And then it's also making sure that the list has a size that's greater than 0.
So when it says Jesus, that size, if that was 0, then that would be false.
If this was 0, so unless, actually let's look it up real quick and see what unless is doing for us. That's a good question. Let's look it up. I'm sure it's in the documentation here. This is not the official documentation. Oh, you can see it even has an if condition, but it's a negative counterpart of an if condition. So it's kind of like the opposite. I wish it would link me to the actual documentation. I don't see a link to the, oh wait, maybe this is it. This looks like more official stuff. Unless. Okay. So unless is mentioned, where does it actually show up? Here we go. So unless is like, it says right here, I can zoom in so you can actually see it. There actually is a way to do an if statement in Thymeleaf. That's something else to learn from this little journey as well. But unless is like the negative counterpart. So it's suggesting the opposite of an if statement. So we would say if true, normally for an if statement, unless is like saying, well, if this is false, then do this thing. In this case, if there's no cheeses list, if this is empty, if this is null, or if this size doesn't return anything. You could rewrite this as an if statement, perhaps. Actually, I'm not sure about that. I might be misstating that. You probably could. Seems reasonable to assume that you could. But they chose to write it this way. which also works. What other questions do you have? Any other questions? Trying to think what other stuff I had for you all. So we talked about loops. How do we handle missing data? So that's what we just talked about, actually, with a selection. Let's talk about this. What does request param do? We saw this actually a little bit on Monday as well, but we saw it a lot more today. What does request param do? Yeah, query parameter. I like that you use that term. Let's go see. I'm sure it's used in here at some point. Here it is. Process add cheese form. Request param string cheese name. So you can see here that the method is a post request. But it is looking for, so how does it know where to get this value from? It's a post request. How does it know where to get this value from? Request param says, take something from the request that's being made and put it into this method. But how does it know where to get this from? From the view? Let's take a look at where this is coming from. This is coming from our form. And inside of our form here, we see that I've got this input type with the name cheese name. That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence. The name of this input text box is exactly the same as the name of this parameter here. So by using request param here, this annotation, we're saying go find this value from the form that was submitted, from the post request specifically, which contains the submitted form, and stick it in this variable so that we can do this with it. Does that make sense? I hope. Are there any questions about that? Any questions? So consistent naming is the key to the story for this piece. We're actually going to play around with this a little bit later as well. Let me see if I can scooch some of this stuff over, make a little more room. All right. How do we perform a redirect? I just actually had it up on the screen a second ago if you're paying attention. Redirect colon and then wherever I want you to go. So this also is kind of a little bit different than how we did it in Flask. Flask, we had our redirect function that we would call in Python. We put the path in there. But this matches the convention that we saw earlier with rendering templates, right? It matches that same idea. Here's returning a template, cheese/add. Here we're doing a redirect, return redirect. It follows the same syntax. It's different than what we saw in Python, but at least it's consistent within the world of Java. And that's a large part of what we're trying to do, is get you to see that, you know, these things all exist, they just behave a little bit differently. And last but certainly not least, what's a fragment? What's the Python equivalent of a fragment that we saw? The base template, yeah, the base template. So Thymeleaf can do that as well. We have a fragment here that just has the header and the footer, so we don't have to keep typing those out over and over and over and over again. And then inside of our other views, to use those fragments, you can actually see that we can replace this chunk here with whatever is in the head piece of our fragment, for example, which we used in the prep work videos to include CSS styling in our web page. So it's the same idea. Again, behaves a little bit differently. The syntax is a little bit different than what we're used to seeing, but the overall idea is basically the same. Allows us to take common code for our views and put it in one place. What questions do you have? I've got a couple of exercises I want us to walk through today, but before we get there, what questions do you have for me? Yes?
It's not explicit as to how to do images. I tried to look up the syntax for it and couldn't find it.
How to do images? In your view, you mean?
Yeah. It's
So what's the tag for an image? IMG. So just slap an IMG tag in your view and you'll have yourself an image. If you wanted to extend that out a little bit farther, you could change what image is being displayed by having a parameter passed in via the model. to tell you I want to display this picture, this picture, this picture, but at the end of the day, any HTML that you would use normally flies in these, it works in these views as well. So image tag should get it done. What other questions do you have? Yes?
So does Thymeleaf automatically escapes characters? You don't have to worry about somebody hijacking form?
I believe that it does, yes, but you know, that's an important enough question that it's worth double checking. Let's double check that one. It does. Somebody in the back says it does. How to escape double quote in Thymeleaf. This isn't really telling me. It might have been mentioned in the prep work. I don't have the entire prep work memorized, but might have been mentioned in there. I don't see anybody worried about forms in these examples. They're worried about doing things like escaping quotes and stuff. So it seems like it's okay. Yeah, it does escape it by default. If you don't want it to escape stuff, you actually have to go out of your way to tell it to not escape stuff by using the utext. I know it's a little small. It says it escapes everything by default, but if you use utext, it will unescape things. So you actually have to go out of your way to not escape things in Thymeleaf. That's what you want to do. And then they tell you not to use it, which is honestly probably pretty good advice. Great questions. What other questions do you have? Yes?
In the cheese controller, the public string process add cheese form. I know it's calling the add HTML file, but I'm not sure how. Is the add, the file add, and the cheese the directory, or the directory?
So we're looking at this one here,
Yeah.
And your question is relating to
How is that getting to where it's going?
the route, like the actual.
To our form.
Okay, so you see the comment here, request path is cheese/add, but then in the request mapping it just says add, right? Is that kind of where the confusion comes from, or?
It's why is it process add cheese?
Yeah, it's just the name of the
It's
function.
just, so that's just a variable. I can name it
You can
whatever.
call it whatever you want. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, we're adding a cheese. It's called the add cheese form, so we're processing the add cheese form. But this is a good, this is sort of a good question anyway, since we're on the topic. This says the request mapping is add, but the route here listed in the comments says that it's cheese/add. Why?
You've got another request mapping further up.
We got another request mapping up here. It's on the class level. So that means that this request mapping is going to apply to every single controller inside of this class. Every single one. So every single handler that's inside of this class is going to start with cheese. It's kind of making a directory, if you want to think of it that way, making a cheese directory on your website. And then any additional information that I provide to the route down here, comes after that base mapping of cheese. Yep. What other questions were there? Keep them coming. All right. I had two other things I wanted to talk to you about today, one of which is directly related to this, but we're going to take a little detour for a second. This course has gotten more complicated. I'm sure that's a pretty obvious statement for me to say. A lot of you have been noticing that as we go along as well. And, we're trying to progress you closer and closer to what it's like working in a real life programming environment, doing real life programming work. That's sort of the goal of this whole this whole class. One thing that I've noticed, one thing that you probably noticed as well, is that errors are happening and people get stuck on those things from time to time, or often perhaps. People make mistakes. I actually made some mistakes recently, which I would like to apologize about regarding the version of Java that I thought was acceptable. I was wrong about that. That one's on me. That's my fault. However, those kinds of things are going to happen all the time. When you go work at a job, your coworkers are going to make mistakes, you're going to make mistakes, and people are going to have to figure out how to fix them. That's part of programming. I make those mistakes on my own projects all the time. And when I get into trouble, when I run into an error, when I run into a problem, I don't have a professor or a TA that I can go to ask for help, unfortunately. I'm not saying that I don't want you to lean on us. We actually are very happy to help you, but I do want us to start thinking about, all of you, to start thinking about how to become more independent in your problem-solving skills, because the fact is, this course ends in a month, right? And while we will still be happy to help you along your journey after this course is over, we're not going to have as much, direct contact with you after this course is over, and it's going to be your responsibility a lot more to solve those kinds of problems. So with that in mind, I thought I would take a few minutes just to kind of talk about, what do you do when you get stuck? Or even more along those lines, if you really need to ask for help, which happens all the time, what's a good way to do it? How do you properly ask for help? Because there are some things that you can do when you're asking for help that will actually make not just your life easier, but the person who you're asking for help's life a lot easier as well. They'll be able to help you more effectively. I think of it this way. If you have car problems, which is funny because I was just changing a flat tire out in front of the building here before class started. If you have car problems, if I take my car into the shop and I say, hey, my car won't start, the mechanic's going to look at you and be like, and? Right? What are the reasons that would cause a car to not start? There are a ton of them. There are a ton of reasons why a car might not work. Lots of them. The same thing's true with the computer. If you tell me that you're having a problem with your program, right, you haven't really narrowed it down a whole lot. If you say, I'm having this error, okay, I believe you, I understand you, that sounds like a real big problem, but without more information, it can be difficult for somebody to help you out. So let's talk about the kinds of things that you can do, the kinds of things that should be on your mind if you're trying to request some help from somebody, or if you're trying to report an issue. And I'd really like to see people start using these here in class as well, even if you're on Slack or talking to us in class. First, I think it's important to specify, what did you think was supposed to happen? You might think it's obvious. You're working on this program. You might think it's obvious what's supposed to be happening. It may not be obvious to somebody else who's not directly, in the work that you've been doing. So first thing you need to do is, what did you expect to happen? And then what actually happened? What's the thing that happened that made you concerned? Why are you thinking that there's a problem here? It might be that you got a big red error message. Or it might be that you clicked a button and instead of printing out XYZ, it printed out ABC, right? So, we need to set the stage here. This one is perhaps very important, maybe the most important one on this list. What steps did you do to make this error happen? This error happens when I click on a button. This error happens when I type this very specific word into the box, right? Does it happen every single time? This error happens, sometimes when I do this thing, but other times it works just fine. What's the frequency of it? Describe the context of this error as much as you possibly can. If there are any error messages, those are very important pieces of information. As somebody who's been working in programming for a long time, and education for a long time as well, I expect people to look those error messages up. First thing that I do when I run into an error message is I quite literally copy-paste the thing into Google, right? Just copy not the whole error message, usually that top line, right? Copy the error message, paste it into Google. You're going to find lots of other people who have the same problems that you did. And some of them will even have solutions to the problems that you're having. So you might be able to fix it that way. If you ask me what an error message means, sometimes I might know, but guess what? Other times I'm going to copy it and paste it into Google because I don't know. There are thousands upon thousands of different error messages, and it's not possible for one person to know what they all are. And then this is also extremely important. What have you already tried to solve the problem? A lot of times when I'm helping people out, I'll ask them, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? And then we waste a lot of time because, they've already tried these things. They've already done these things, and I'm asking them stuff that they've already done. if you tell me what you've done in the first place, then we can try something different. We can try to narrow down the problem a little bit more quickly. So I'm really just trying to give you guys an idea of, what kinds of information is useful when solving problems. And actually, this isn't just stuff that I made up. This is pretty standard. If you go online and you look up real-life bug reports, right? Real-life bug reports. You can find, I was going to try and find an actual bug report, but let's see if I can find a bug report for Google Chrome. I'm sure there are plenty. Come on now. Oh yeah? Thank you. Perfect. This isn't maybe an actual bug report, but it's at least, oh, here we go. Bug report template in GitHub, so here's some things that you can do. This one's pretty good. Summary, so it tells you what's wrong, right? Steps to reproduce. What did you do? What were you doing with the application when this problem happened? We're trying to narrow it down. We're trying to eliminate as much, extraneous stuff and get to the root of the problem as we possibly can. What did we expect to happen? So this is the thing that actually happened. What did we actually expect to happen? And then down here, they even request that you post, so on this one, they're posting what browser they were using, what screen size they were using, all of this stuff. I'm usually not that strict about it, but other places it matters. That kind of stuff matters. Personally, for the stuff we're doing in this class, I think that's maybe less relevant. But this stuff at the top is so useful. So very useful. And I would, especially, I don't know, this particular case didn't have an error message associated with it, but if there was an error message, like that red text that you're used to seeing at the bottom of IntelliJ from time to time when things go wrong, I would expect that to be included with your bug report as well. It also printed out this error. Although knowing how to read those error messages is also extremely useful. So extremely useful. And oftentimes it'll even tell you the line where things went wrong. So you should, at least take a crack at trying to solve these problems yourself as well. Does anybody have any questions about this? Like I said, I think these are important skills that we don't emphasize enough in programming. As a programmer, I don't write code correctly the first time. It doesn't happen. I write code that has mistakes. I write code that's broken the first time. And then I have to fix it. And I'm actually probably spending more of my time fixing problems or learning how to do things the proper way than I actually am writing code, that works. That's programming, is learning how to fix problems. Does anybody have any questions about this? So I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea. We're here to help you. The TAs and I are here to help you. I love interacting with you guys and helping you solve your problems. But especially as we get closer to the end of the class, I think we'd be doing you a disservice if we fix all of your problems for you. I think we would be hurting you. I think it's to your advantage to try and solve some of these problems yourself. Now, that being said, I know you have deadlines. I know you have limited time in a week, right? I know you don't have an infinite amount of time to spend on this stuff. So I'm not telling you that you should bang your head up against a problem for 3 days before you come ask for help. That is not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that you take a few minutes to see if you can figure out the situation yourself beforehand. And I think you might be surprised at how often you're actually able to get there without needing to ask for help. But we are still here for help if you need it, but provide us as much information as possible so that we can help you as effectively as possible. Great. Any questions? Any comments? All right. Let's do an exercise about Spring Boot then to wrap up today. For the studio, it expects you to do one of the practice problems. So I wanted to go over that practice problem in class just to make sure. If you already did it, great, fantastic. I'm glad to hear it. If you didn't do it, hopefully you at least got through the prep work videos. There were 3. I know they were kind of long this time around, but there was a lot of good information in those prep work videos. So hopefully you at least made it through those 3 videos. if you didn't get through the first prep exercise, it's necessary for today's studio. So I wanted to do that together as a group to kind of wrap up today's session. So the first exercise that's listed here wants us to add a description field to our application. So right now, I think I've actually got it up and running. Let me see. Localhost 8080. Oh, cheese. I forgot cheese. Sorry. Cheese. All right, cool. So I've actually already got some stuff on my list, which is cool. Right, so everything is, working for us. I already had Gouda and Swiss, so we'll put cheddar on there. Adds cheeses just fine. We want to add a description. We want to add a description field to this. So I want to describe some stuff about these cheeses as I add them. So it even gives us some pointers here about what to do. We need to modify our cheeses list to be a hash map. So we were using an array list, just a simple list of cheese names, but now we want a hash map. Why is a hash map valuable to us? What's the, I just scrolled the answer off the screen. What's the key going to be? The cheese, and the value is going to be the description. So I can look up the descriptions by the names of the cheeses that I want. So that's step number one. Let's do that. Let's go ahead and do it. My list is right here. Static array list string. So we don't want an array list anymore. We want a hash map. So the key type is going to be, what's the type of the key going to be? And the type of the value is going to be also a string. So we can stick that in there and then change this to say hash map. And I probably need to import it. You can see it's a little angry about that. So we'll use the fancy IntelliJ trick to do the import for me. And we now have a hash map. You'll notice that when we did that, it kind of broke some other stuff down here. So now it says cheeses.add cheese name. So it doesn't like this anymore, right? Which is probably the next step on our, well, it's the third step, I guess. So let's do this. Let's do this next step. We need to add a new form input to our form for the submission of the description. So that's going to be in the template, this form here. We already have one text box. We just need another one. So we'll go ahead and put in another text box here, and we'll call it cheese description, I guess. But I think we should also probably put in, some labels so we know which box is which. Let's save this and I can't run it yet because I haven't fixed that error in my controller. But I would like to check that at some point and make sure that it looks reasonable and we didn't totally blow it up. All right. So I think step 3 is to fix this method here. Why is this line busted? What's it unhappy about? Add doesn't work on hash maps. What's it called for a hash map? It's called put. And put doesn't take just one, it takes two. The first one is the key, and the second one is the value. So what's my value going to be? Cheese description, but I don't have anything called cheese description in this method yet. I need to add a second request parameter to this method to make that work. So I added that value to the form, right? But I didn't add anything to the controller to pull that value out of the form. That's what the request parameter is doing. So I need to add a second request parameter here. Oops. Cheese description. And now I have that cheese description value that I can add to my map. Okay, there are no errors right now. We're not done yet, but I do want to kind of sort of, test as much as we can, make sure that it's working reasonably well before we proceed and finish up the last couple things that we need to do for this exercise. So I'm going to rerun it. I want to check the format of that form and maybe even try typing some values in to see how they work. So we'll restart this real quick.
Why does it take so long?
Why does it take so long to restart it? You can see that it's doing a lot of stuff, and actually you can see that you can even see what some of the stuff that it's doing. Apache is a web server, so it's restarting your Apache web server. Is that an error that I just got? Address already, okay, so localhost 8080, I was running it from last time. I tried to run it again, but it's like, oh wait, you're already running a thing on that one, so I have to kill that off first and then restart another one. I think it did that for me automatically, right? Or did it not? It says build successful in task execution. So that's part of the reason why it took some time. I had to stop the old one and then restart it. It's just doing a lot of necessary stuff. No cheese. All right, let's go to the ad thing. Hey, this looks fine. I mean, it's not the prettiest website in the world, but it looks okay. And then if I type in something, cheddar, sharp, sure. For tacos, yeah. All right, so this looks a little odd, yeah?
Yeah.
I see both pieces of information, but there's an equal sign in the middle, and this isn't quite formatted correctly. Where would I look to change this? Into the view. So if I go into the view, the index, you can see that it's iterating through the list of cheeses, but it's still treating this as if it were a list. Still treating this as if it were a list. I don't see any indication of keys and values here. I expect there to be two values, the name and the description. And it's really just treating it like it's still an array list, like there's one value in there. So actually the website gives us a hint on how to approach this. Down here, you can see that the for each loop changes a little bit, right? It's still a for each loop. This is the hash map, and then I can say dot key and dot value to get the keys and values out of each item from my hash map, where the key is the description and the value is the value is the the key is the name and the value is the description. So this code's not going to work directly in here. Let's see, do I want this to be a list item? This isn't a list item. This was what did I click? This is a table. I don't know that I want that. Now let's just see if we can modify what we've got here. So this is a hash map now. If I want this to be the name of the cheese, what should I put? Dot key. But then I also want to put the description in there as well, right? So how can I add the description on as well? Does anybody have any ideas? Can I do them both in one go? Is that possible? Yeah? How do I do it? I agree. I think it is possible, but the syntax is the tricky part of that. How do I put them both in here? Concatenation, I think is a good idea. I want to put like a little dash in between, right?
It's within the squigglies.
It's within the squigglies. All right. Plus. And then what? Single quotes. I like single quotes, so I can say single quote dash, and then plus cheese.value. This was a little tricky. Single quotes here are important because I'm already using double quotes. I'm already using double quotes here, but single quotes will get the job done. This just adds a little extra formatting in between the key and the value. Right? I think this will work. Let's try it out. I shouldn't have to restart it because you only have to restart it if you change the controller, and I didn't change the controller, so if I go back here and refresh, cool, it looks good. Looks good. So I can add some other stuff. Swiss, 4 tacos. Don't judge me. It's working. It's working. Cool. We successfully added that in. Are there any questions about what we just did? It sort of touched every single piece, right? We changed the data structure that was underlying actually, which part of the MVC is that hash map? That's the model. That's the model for now. Is it a good model? No, not really. Eventually we would like that model to be in a database like we have with Flask, and eventually it will be in a database again like we have with Flask. But for now, we're taking it one step at a time. We don't have a database at the moment. We don't have a database yet. So we're using that hash map as our model for the time being. That will change. So we changed our model, which caused us to have to change our controller, and then we had to update our view to match the new model as well. So we kind of touched all of the parts of our application. What questions do you have? Does anybody have any questions? Yes, what's up? So the question was, why do you need to do the concatenation within the curly braces here? I believe the answer to that is that, so what language is this that we're doing? Is this HTML? No, it's Thymeleaf, which is really just Java, actually. This is valid Java syntax inside these curly braces here. So if I'm doing Thymeleaf directives, if I'm doing Java, it needs to be inside those curly braces. If I'm doing HTML, then it can be outside the curly braces. But this is not HTML. This is not HTML. And if you need an indication from that, this dot notation, right? Or even the string concatenation that we did, that doesn't work in HTML. That's not an HTML thing. It does have to be inside the curly braces.
Just to kind of build on that though, so the th text equals quotes, and then the curly brackets. So I guess like the th text, that doesn't indicate that like the following piece in between quotes is going to be Java. It's only the piece that's in between curly brackets. Yes,
that's correct. That's absolutely correct. And to prove that, yeah. So the question was, the quotes alone don't tell me that it's going to be in Java. That's true. It's the $ curly brace that tells me that Java is coming up. And if you want to, prove it, I can prove that to you by just putting in a word here. This will still work. This will still work just fine, but you can probably imagine what's going to happen, right? I can type any piece of text in there that I want, and Thymeleaf will happily put it in. But if I want it to be related to my model, and if I want to do Java, which is required if I'm going to be accessing my model, I need those curly braces in there to make it happen. What other questions do you have? Great questions. Yeah, in the back. I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you. Is it being escaped automatically? Yes, I believe we determined earlier that in fact was happening. I believe so. I guess we could test that out too, though, huh? By trying to put something weird in here. Button. Hi/button. Is that a thing? I don't know. Put some HTML in there and see how it renders. Uh-oh. That broke. Yeah, error exception parsing document. So in this case, it didn't get escaped because it didn't even run the darn thing. But that's okay with me because this is a little weird what I tried to do anyway. This is not a very normal thing to be doing. So I'm not unhappy that it gave me an error. I mean, you could just try to. A user, yeah, hopefully would not be doing stuff like this. Oh, I don't know why I reran it. That wasn't necessary. Habit. That was not. Oh well. Yeah, it seems like if I try to hard code more HTML directly in there, yeah, it doesn't like it. But this is a good example of what I was saying earlier. If an error pops up, it sometimes will tell you where it is. Or actually not sometimes, it will always tell you where it is. line 12, column 53. And in IntelliJ, the line numbers are right here on the left-hand side. If you don't see those line numbers there, it's probably in the preferences somewhere that you can turn it on. Also, not really, this is another reason why I encourage people to write a little bit of code and test, and write a little bit of code and test, and write a little bit of code and test. If I've been going through an 8-hour marathon coding session, and then I try to test my code after 8 hours and it breaks, where did it go wrong? Oh man, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. But if I wrote 3 or 4 lines and I run it and it breaks, I know that the problem is somewhere in those 3 or 4 lines that I just wrote. So that's why I think writing small chunks and testing is good. Can I get my other stuff back without having to retype it all out? That would be... Okay, good. What other questions did you have? In the back, yeah.
Kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, we were talking a little bit about how, like, now that our assignment, like, had someone else's code,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any, like, tips for understanding what they're doing?
Oh, okay.
Writing that yourself in a different
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question because programming is not a one-person experience. Most of the time, you're gonna be working on teams, or a lot of times you get hired at a company and you're not starting from scratch. They already have a whole bunch of code that somebody already wrote, or a lot of somebody's already wrote, right? So I think you're absolutely on the right track. Where the first thing you should do is try to familiarize yourself as much as possible with the code you've got in front of you. First thing I would do in that situation, it might seem like a very obvious thing to say, is just run it. See what it does, run it. Hopefully, now I know this isn't always true, but hopefully the people who wrote that code documented it somehow, either comments or in some sort of formal documentation somewhere, maybe online, or both would be ideal, but I realize that in the real world that kind of stuff doesn't always happen, so you might not get a lot of documentation available with the code. If it's possible and you know who wrote the code, you could always go ask them. They might not know the answer if they did it a long time ago, or they didn't do a good job of documenting their own stuff. They might not know. But sort of going down the list from easiest to hardest, the hardest way to do it, the most tedious way, I guess, perhaps, is to sit there and read it line by line. Put some print statements in the middle of it if you have to, that shows the results of the code step by step as you walk through the process. Although I guess I kind of skipped an option there. Another option that you could do is, do I really care how it works? Or is there a method that's in there, right? Somebody wrote this method, somebody wrote this function, somebody wrote this class, and they told me that this class does X, Y, and Z, and I'm just going to trust them that it does X, Y, and Z. Do I know how it does X, Y, and Z? No. Do I care how it does X, Y, and Z? Not really. I just need to know that that's what it's doing so that I can do whatever I need to do over here. So I think that's also a very viable answer a lot of the time is, who cares? Who cares what their code is doing on a very detailed level? Maybe all I need to know is what it's doing on a very high level. Maybe that's enough to get me to do my job. Especially for large applications, just not possible or feasible to know every single detail about what's happening under the hood. Teams, a lot of times, programming teams will have people whose entire role is to coordinate with other programming teams to make sure that they understand how their projects are going to be communicating with each other. So their whole job is to specify, the output of this thing over here is going to be the input to our thing over here, and then the output of our thing over here is going to be the input to this thing over here, and manage those communications so that we don't necessarily need to know what that other team is doing on a very detailed level. That's for like gigantic applications, right? Huge applications, not the smaller stuff that we've been doing in class. I know it was a very long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully it helped. What other questions do you have? Any other questions? Is there a question over here? Got a question? What's up? Oh yeah, what's up? Sorry.
So with the fragments, you're sending individual elements, or
I'm sorry, say that one more time?
go back to the fragments.
Yeah, the fragments.
You're
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're getting at. Yeah, so here, yes, you can see that it is saying replace this head tag with the head tag from Fragments. It is a lot more, I guess I'd call it sort of fine grained, I guess, in that regard. I'm choosing individual elements that I want to replace in particular files, not necessarily large portions like the base HTML file we were doing before. Yes, I would agree with that. That, in some sense, is more useful, though. I mean, it gives us more flexibility. You can think of the fragments as being more independent in that regard, I guess. They're not meant to be taken as a single unit. I can sort of pick and choose which ones are relevant to me, and if something isn't relevant to me, then I just ignore it and do it the way I want to do it. Whereas with the way we did it in Flask, it was sort of an all or nothing kind of deal, where if I reference the base template, then I get the whole thing. I get all of it, or none of it. What other questions can I answer for you all today? Yes?
If we're starting our own personal project,
Mm-hmm.
do you suggest we use the Spring initializer with Gradle and all that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The question was, do I suggest that you use the Spring initializer? Absolutely, I would, 100%. Do you have to use it? No, but it's gonna be, your time will be better spent on other things than trying to create these projects from scratch. Just because you can create it from scratch doesn't necessarily mean that you should. In fact, as programmers, we're oftentimes looking for ways to make those kinds of repetitive, tedious things easier, and that Spring initializer is one great example of how we've done that. Making Spring projects used to be a big chore, and it's not so bad anymore. It's gotten better. Now we can focus our time on actually figuring out how we want our application to work instead of setting up a project. Great questions. What other questions do you have? Yeah?
How do you refer to like the grouping together of all those different frameworks?
Grouping together of all those different frameworks?
So like there's like a bunch of different things that are layered on top of each other at once.
Yeah.
How do you refer to that?
So Gradle is actually sort of the glue that ties it all together. I would refer to it as the configuration, the build configuration. And that's really what Gradle does for us. It's a configuration manager. So tell me what frameworks you want to use for your application. Gradle will grab those frameworks and make sure that they're available for you to use. So that's what I would call it, configuration. What other questions? Yeah, in the back.
So on the Spring Starter, there's a drop down that includes Maven as another
Yes.
choice. What is the usage case difference between Gradle and
Yeah, actually Maven is trying to do exactly what Gradle's trying to do, which is a configuration manager tool. I don't have as much experience with Maven, but what I do know about it is that it's made by, or at least currently run by the Apache group, which is a very large, very influential open source group that has their hands in a lot of different projects. We're using the Apache server right now. And so part of what Apache tries to do is make it so that all of their tools work very well together. They communicate well with each other. They work very well with each other. Some people like the convenience of having everything under this one big Apache umbrella. So all of their tools come from the same place. So Maven's gotten a lot of usage for that reason. Some people really, really enjoy it. Gradle is sort of a more independent product, I guess, is the best way of describing it. They kind of do their own thing. They're not worried about... I don't think the folks at Gradle really do anything other than work on Gradle, unlike Apache, which literally has dozens, maybe even hundreds of different projects that they're working on. And Maven is just one of those, albeit a very big, very important one. And that's another part of computing that you'll learn over time too, is a lot of times programmers will make decisions, or maybe you've already learned this just based on this class. They'll make decisions not because of how something works or what it can do, but based on who made the thing, politics, reasons like that. Some people just don't trust particular companies, so they'll never use anything by those companies. See it all the time. Can be very opinionated about those kinds of things. Some people are all in. They drink the Kool-Aid and Apple's the greatest company in the world. Oh, wait, sorry. Yeah. So, it goes both ways. As for every snarky comment I make about Apple, that you all could make equally snarky comments about how I'm sitting up here with my Microsoft Surface Book, running Windows 10 and using Visual Studio for all of my stuff. So, it goes both ways. And I will gladly take those shots. Come at me. What other questions you got?
Do you have a baby yet?
Not yet. If I had a baby, I wouldn't be here. Not even joking, I wouldn't be here. I guess sort of along those lines, DJ, one of our TAs, DJ, is going to be running the class on Monday. I will still probably be here. He's not doing it because I expect to have the baby on Monday, although that is a possibility. He's just doing it because he showed an interest in wanting to teach some classes, and we wanted to give that to him. And I think he's going to be fantastic at it. So DJ will be here on Monday. He's a great guy. Some of you already know him. He's fantastic. He's going to do a great job. Don't be surprised when you see him up here on Monday. But I'll still be around, unless the baby comes. I'm still planning to be here, still planning to help out. All right, what time is it? 6:30? Cool. Unless there's any last questions, we'll go ahead and split up into groups. You do have a studio today, although the tech jobs assignment's probably a bit higher priority if you haven't got that done yet. So I would suggest getting that finished up first if you haven't done so. Get that demoed to your TAs, and then take a look at the studio. And we're going to do studio review at 8 o'clock, like we always do. I'll see you then.